Hi there, today I'm going to talk about mixed media supplies, and I get a lot of comments and questions from people who would like to start using mixed media in their scrapbooking projects, but they're just not sure where to start. So where do I start is probably one of the biggest questions that I get and most frequent questions that I get. I have some supplies, but I don't have an extensive supply of mixed media stuff. And so I'm here to tell you that you don't need to have a whole bunch of things to make mixed media work on your scrapbook projects. So I'm going to give you guys a sense of just a couple of different supplies. I don't want to overwhelm you with too many options, and I'm just going to focus on the things that I use more in my scrapbooking projects. I'm just going to talk about the things that I am likely to use on my mixed media pages, because those might be a good starting place for you guys to add mixed media to your pages. So I'm actually running low on white cardstock, so I have 4 pieces of vanilla cardstock here, and when people ask me where do I start, my answer is with gesso. Gesso is the best starting point for using mixed media on your scrapbooking pages. I'm not saying that you have to use gesso, and I'm not even saying that you should use gesso, but I am saying that a tub of this stuff will really increase what you can do with your other mixed media supplies, and it will really help your scrapbooking pages stand up to all of the water and abuse they have to put them through sometimes when you're making mixed media projects. So using gesso underneath of these color mediums really makes a big difference in terms of look. And sometimes you might want the look of just a plain paper that doesn't have gesso, and sometimes you might want a gesso look. For the most part, I personally prefer a gessoed look. I also prefer the weight and stability that gesso gives me. So you might be asking, what is gesso? Well, gesso is a primer that you use on your mixed media backgrounds before you add the different types of media to it. So this is used to seal in whatever it is that you're putting your paint on. It makes your paper stand up to the medium that you might put on it, and it also keeps your media from sinking into the paper, which really changes the look when it kind of is absorbed inside of the paper. It kind of spreads out a little bit, feathers, and sometimes the color gets a little distorted by sinking into the paper. So gesso coats your paper and keeps all of the things that you're going to be using on top of the paper instead of sinking into the paper. I'm going to gesso half of each of these 4 pieces of paper so that when I go to show you how you can use these sorts of products as mixed media products, you'll be able to see the difference between when it lands on gesso and when it lands on paper that's unfinished. So you can also use gesso in place of paint. I did that in one of my process videos for this class, the one where I used my alphabet graveyard. So this is actually a brand new bottle of gesso. I used up all of mine on that project. So gesso, it is the consistency, it looks a lot like a tub of white paint. And I just scoop some out with my palette knife. I just have an inexpensive plastic palette knife here, and I'm using golden gesso, which is it's not the cheapest gesso in the world, but I really like the texture of it. Now, gesso actually it looks like plain white paint, but it is not at all the same as paint. It has a much more textured, it has some tooth to it. And what I mean by that is it's got a fine feeling to it when you run your finger over it after it's dry. And so I'm just spreading this out as evenly as I can on this piece of paper. The paper's very thin, so it's not holding up all that great to a thick layer of gesso. So I'm going to thin it out with my credit card. Applying gesso with a credit card is really one of the best ways to do it, because you can really get a thin layer. As you can see, you can actually see through the layer of gesso that I have here, and that helps it to dry a lot faster. and it also helps you save some product. So I just take the extra gesso and I just scrape it back into the tub. And now I have one piece of paper that's half gessoed and half paper. Now gesso doesn't take very long to dry, so those will dry fairly quickly even without a heat gun, but if I wanted to dry them to use them right away, one of the wonderful things about gesso, especially when you apply it so thin with a credit card, is that it does dry really, really fast. So if I hit that with a heat gun, I would be able to just keep on going and start using this almost right away. I'm not though, I'm just going to, because I have some things to talk to you guys about, I'm just going to let them air dry. All three of these products are products that I talked about and showed in quite a bit of detail in my process video where I talk about mixed media products. I'm not going to show you all of them all over again, but I will point out that Liquitex and Golden both have these ratings on the backs of them so that you know what you're getting without having to play around with it in the store. So for example, this is light molding paste by Golden. It's so light, it's actually, whenever I pick it up, it always feels like it's an empty jar, like these are so much heavier than this. But it's actually pretty full. It feels light. It feels like it's empty. So this tells you where it is on the transparent to opaque scale, and so this particular one, which is light molding paste, is completely over on the opaque side. So this is going to be very opaque, not at all transparent, so you're not going to be able to see through it. From the matte to gloss scale, this is all the way over on the matte side, so this means that this is as matte as products get. It's very, very matte. In fact, it dries with a bit of a foamy substance. It actually looks a whole lot like Fun Foam when it is dry. And then from thin to thick, it's all the way over on the thickest side. So this means that this is quite a thick product. You can see just by the way that it is in the jar that it really holds its shape, and that it will dry like that too if you didn't have the lid on it. So that means that if you make little mountains or peaks or wisps or leave marks in it, that it's going to hold that shape and dry like that, and then you can use that as one of your layers. So the glass beads, for example, the Liquitex, it uses slightly different language, but it still rates all of its products in the same ways. So this part here tells you which stage this is used for. So it's not for prepping, it's for painting. It's not for finishing either. And then this rates it from fluid to thick instead of, this one is from thick to thin. So fluid to thick, and this is a little bit on the thick side. It's a little bit more than halfway over on the thick side. And so, you know, it's kind of gluey. And then from matte to gloss, this finish is a high gloss finish. So it's not the highest that they have, but it's pretty glossy. And then from transparent to opaque, it's about midway through. So it's going to be a little bit see-through, but not entirely clear either. This natural sand, on the other hand, it's also for the paint phase. It's a little bit thicker than the other. It's actually about equally thick with the glass beads. And it is midway between matte and gloss, whereas this is more glossy, and it is quite a bit more opaque, whereas this is midway through transparent and opaque. So this really makes it easy for you to pick new products to play with. At the art store, you can have a bit of a sense of what you're getting, as opposed to just randomly saying, well, glass beads, I wonder what that's like, and needing to pay the, you know, however much. This is probably $7 or $8 for a bottle of it, so that's quite a lot if you're just experimenting, right? So it's nice that they give you that information so you know what you're getting into. So if you were starting out and wanted to try mixed media, I would buy 2 mixed media supplies. I would buy a nice tub of gesso. I'd get white gesso because it's probably the most versatile. I do enjoy clear gesso for my art journaling, and I plan to buy some black gesso next time I'm at the art store just because I like it. But white gesso is a really nice starting point. So I would buy this, although you don't have to get the golden, you can get it in lots of different brands. I've even seen it at the dollar store. I don't know how good the gesso is from the dollar store, but you can play around with it and see if you like a less expensive brand than golden. So I'd start with gesso, and then I would start with something else. So I would buy some light molding paste or some of this natural sand texture gel or some embossing paste. And you can buy it from any company. Ranger makes lots of great products, and you can probably pick that right up at your local scrapbooking store, or when you're doing some scrapbook shopping online, you can just grab a tub of texture paste or embossing paste or whatever they call it. The different brands, they're all called different things. I will leave a list of options in the information section for this video so that you have some options. I would just get the cheapest one and just start to play, because the differences between them are pretty subtle, with the exception of this one that's glass beads. I mean, it has little glass beads in it. That's pretty distinct. But if you're getting any of these molding pastes or texture gels or embossing pastes, they're all going to be pretty similar, just slightly different textures, slightly different levels of opaqueness and glossiness. So I would just get one and start playing around with it. That's how you get some texture on your page, is with one of these three bad boys right here. It could be one of the other ones that I don't have, but I'm just working with those. I will talk about the third thing that I'd suggest that you get if you're going to start. I'd start with gesso, some type of molding paste, texture gel, or embossing paste or whatever, something like that. And then the third thing is a stencil, or 2 or 10. So these are all of my stencils. I have a lot of them because I've been doing mixed media projects for a very long time. A lot of these are quite old, only a few of them are new. I'm going to grab, actually I think I'm going to grab my Tim Holtz ones because they're nice and small and easy to hold. One thing that I'd like to show you is how you can even use gesso as an embossing paste if you really needed to. So I'm going to put this stencil right here, and I want it to span both sides just so that you can see. Especially if you have a nice thick gesso like this golden, it is, again, on the thickness to thinness, it is a little bit less than halfway thick. And so if I give this a good stir, and if I just swipe this right across like that, now because it's so fluid, it's going to be messy using it with a stencil, so it might leak and make very imperfect hearts, especially on the big hearts. This will do a better job on the smaller hearts. I'm going to pull this up and show you that this actually gives texture without even needing to have any texture paste at all. This gives lovely texture. It's not going to be as tall or thick, but it does still give some really nice texture. I'm going to set this aside to dry, and I'm going to show you the light molding paste. So the light molding paste, you can use white, or you can add any of these color mediums or any other color medium to it and stir it up the way I did in my video, and then you will have a colored paste, which looks lovely. I'm just going to spread it on here white. The more thickly you put this on, the more you'll be able to see some texture in the resulting piece. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I will put some natural sand on this one. So I've just sped up the process because you get the technique by now. I'm just doing the same thing to put the natural sand from Liquitex, and now I'm just spreading the glass beads from Liquitex and spreading them all over this project. And I just slowed it down so that you could see the reveal. There you go. I just let those dry for a couple of hours, and here I come back again. Okay, so I have my 4 pieces of 8.5 by 11 cardstock here. So half is bare, the bottom halves are bare, and the top halves are gessoed. And then I have stenciled with 4 different mediums, and I'm going to show you the results now that they're all completely dry. This first one is made with gesso, and this is proof that you really don't need a whole lot of supplies at all to play with mixed media and get some texture on your page. There is some lovely texture happening here just by wiping some gesso through one of my stencils. You can see down here as well that here is where I really loaded the gesso on quite a bit thicker, and you can see that it sits on top of even the paper that isn't gessoed. Gesso will sit on top of paper. And so I'm not demonstrating the difference between gesso and not gesso with this part of it. The paper is half gessoed for the next part when I go to add colored media and water. That's where you'll really see the difference. So I'm not expecting to see a huge difference in how these mediums hold on the paper, because it will, these things will stick to paper and they'll look great on paper regardless of whether you gesso the paper or not. I've gessoed my paper to show you the next step, which is where I start adding color. So this is just to show you the results. So I don't want you to compare top to bottom here. We're just looking at these results. So this is what gesso looks like when you use it on a stencil. It adds lovely texture. Like, look at that, for example. That's very nice. So it is soft and it's subtle, and but it's definitely there. It's definitely texture. This is the Liquitex Natural Sand. Looks like that. And this has a slightly rubbery feel to it. It's got a slight sheen. It's not, I wouldn't call it glossy, but it's got a slight sheen to it, and it has a very sandy feel, and there's definitely a raised hearts here. So that's how that one looks. This one is Glass Beads, also by Liquitex. And here you can really see the texture that you get with those beads. So the beads are suspended in a glossy substance that dries to a glossy, clear finish. And so where the beads have landed, it's obviously there are beads, and then where there are no beads, there's just this glossy substance. And so the glossy substance itself sits on top of the paper and provides a little bit of texture, but it's really the beads that provide most of the texture in this example. And then this is the light molding paste from Golden. This is a foamy, soft, it almost feels like it's flocked. It's not quite as soft as flocking, but it definitely feels like fun foam. And you'll see that the place where I specifically left a little peak there so that you could see that that dries, and it's flexible and it's not going to break off. So you get all the ridges left in this. This is my very favorite product. I like how it dries to a real matte finish, and I just love the texture of it. It's beautiful. So now that you see the difference between those 4 substances, I'll let you know that there are a lot of other different specialty effects and pastes and molding pastes and gels and that sort of thing. So check out the art section at Michael's or your art supply store and definitely experiment if you want to. If you don't want to spend a whole lot, get yourself a bottle of gesso and get yourself some type of molding paste, or just try one thing. And if I were trying one thing, I wouldn't try something too specialized like the beads. I'd try either the light molding paste or the natural sand or something along those lines. You can get more than just beads suspended in this glossy substance. You can get fibers and fluffy things and little confettis and all sorts of things suspended in different types of mediums. I just wanted to show a few things to you guys so that you don't feel too overwhelmed by all of the options. There's not too much of a difference between, even this one is quite different, but you know, texture is texture. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to have a couple of everything, just have one or two things, and that's all that you need. So now that I've shown you how each of these pastes look, I'm going to put them away and take out some colors to play with. So I have some Heidi Swapp color mists. I have some Liquitex ink because this is my new favorite thing to play with. I have some distress inks because almost every scrapbooker has some, so I thought that was a good safe one to go with. And I have some gelatos because they're another one of my favorites. You could also use watercolor, you could use reinker, you could use mists like Adirondack mists and Dylusion spray and Mr. Huey's or any other kind of color medium that you have. Each formulation has different properties, and so really the best way to learn is not really by watching me do it. The best way to learn is by doing it yourself. So I will encourage you to play with your stuff. And I am going to learn here as I go along. I haven't tried every single one of these in every single situation. And so it really is the best way to learn, is to just get out your supplies, gesso some stuff, not gesso some stuff, and play. So I'm going to show you guys a couple of really basic looks that you can get with these products. I have a water bottle here that I keep in my scrap room for misting onto papers. And so I'm going to start with using Heidi Swapp Color Shine to get a watercolored look. So I'm going to start with the paper that has, this is the Natural Sand texture gel. And so I'm going to start with that. This side is bare paper and this side is gessoed, and I'm going to add these Heidi Swapp color mists, and I'm going to try to get a nice watercolor effect using them. And so I'm going to start by wetting my paper, and what that does is it keeps the mist from settling into the paper right away. So you'll see, I'm just speeding this up because it takes a long time otherwise. You'll see that as I turn it and add water, the mist does lots of beautiful, wonderful things, and it's really moving around a whole lot more on the side that has the gesso than it is on the side that is not gessoed. So basically, once it hits the paper and starts to sink in on the non-gessoed side, you're done. Like, it's not really moving anywhere. You can add more, but it's not really going anywhere. Whereas with the gesso, you'll notice that I'd spray water and I'd add some, and then I could actually kind of take it off. I could remove some of it with a piece of paper towel and then add some more water and try to get some more, try to get it to move in a different way around on the page. So I'm going to put that aside to dry now, and I'm going to put away those mists. Oh, what I'm talking about here is just that because I had used two opposite colors, they are not side by side on the color wheel, I got a little bit more of a muddy effect from combining those two colors than I would have if I had chosen two colors that were beside each other on the color wheel. So that is something to take into consideration. So here I'm using a blue and a green. They are beside each other on the color wheel. So I'm just going to show how these two are going to mix quite a bit nicer, and you're not going to have that that kind of muddy look. These are Distress inks, and I just made them pool up on my nonstick mat, and then I added some water and just picked it up with the paper. This is my favorite way of using Distress inks, and you really do get a beautiful watercolored effect. I really love the modeling, and you will see that even on the non-gessoed paper, it picked it up quite nicely, and you still get that nice watercolored look. In fact, I kind of like how it sinks into the non-gessoed paper. Now I want to add another color here, and so I just added a tiny bit of the really bright pink, and because they're Distress inks, they actually do reactivate when they become wet again. So when I added the liquid from the pink in the water to the already dried green and blue, it reactivated and mixed with the pink, and that's why I'm getting the purple there. That's just really beautiful. I love how it kind of dribbles down into this triangular shape and kind of goes all around the shapes of the hearts. It looks really pretty. So I'm adding some more water. I like to add water at the beginning of all of these particular techniques, it's really just kind of the same technique, adding liquid color on top of water and then seeing how it plays. Here again, I'm using a green and a blue, the cerulean blue, and I think that's phthalo whatever green. And those are the Liquitex inks, and they're so beautiful. I just love that green. It's one of my favorite colors of green, and I love how it's got a little bit of creaminess to it. It's so pretty. And so I'm drying it with my heat gun, and I accidentally put the paper down in a puddle of water, so it's all wet on the backside. Even the side with gesso on it is wet on the backside, see? And that's kind of showing through and affecting how it looks a little bit, but it still looks really beautiful. I like this quite a lot. And again, with the ungessoed side of the paper, it's really just kind of once that ink hits it, it starts to sink in, and it's pretty much not going to move anywhere. So now I'm adding some of this magenta, and look at how it changes when you add more water to it. It goes on so rich and deep, such a rich, deep purple. And then as soon as you add the water, it just explodes into this beautiful magenta. It's so lovely. It's just, the process of making this is just so much fun to just see these colors burst in front of you on the page. I really love those Liquitex inks for that reason. And so this is a very mottled and watery looking and very bright and colorful background paper. And so again, I'm just going to dry off my nonstick mat so I can start all over again. And now I was going to do a similar type of technique with the gelatos, but I can't resist doing a rainbow. Whenever it comes to gelatos, I kind of feel like I almost have no choice but to do a rainbow when I'm working with gelatos. I just love this look so much. I'm putting a big amount of pigment at the top and then pulling down smaller drips of the pigment down vertically, and I kind of misjudged the space there, so I added a purple. And now I'm adding lots and lots of water. I actually added a lot more water than I needed because I'm used to using the Distress crayons, and they require a whole lot more water than these do. And so I really could have just grabbed my wet paintbrush, and because I added so much water, a lot of the color just kind of got dripped off the edge of the page. So I'm just adding a little bit more here. You see me doing that, and just kind of swiping it with my paintbrush. This is like the easiest and fastest way that you can get a rainbow colored watercolor background for your page that I can possibly think of. This would make a beautiful background just as it is. I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm going to dab up some, see those pools of darker color at the top? There's a red one, an orange one, and there's a blue one. And watch when I dab it what happens. It's going to become the reverse. Instead of being a big dark pool, it's going to become a white spot when I dab it up with my cloth there. There you go. See that? And I really love that. It adds such beautiful texture and interest to a page. This one right here would make this is my favorite of all the four, and it would make a really lovely starting point for a page. I would put some embellishments and layers right on top of those hearts so you could see them peeking out from behind my layers. Okay, so here are the final products. Everything is dry and ready to scrapbook with. So this is the page that I made using the Liquitex ink. And this one has the glass bead texture gel. And you'll notice that the part of the page that is on gesso is very painterly. It kind of, you know, it sat on top of the surface so that I could mix it nicely, whereas in this, on the bottom part, which is still quite wet, it really sunk in and I didn't have much time to move things around. Here is the page that I made using spray mists, using the Heidi Swapp mists in this case. So because it was using the Heidi Swapp mist, it has a shimmery sheen to it. You'll notice that the Heidi Swapp mists are really not very movable at all on the paper part. It's pretty much where it landed is where it stayed. It started to soak into the page as soon as it hit the paper, even when you sprayed it with water first. And now this is, and this one was with the sand, Liquitex sand paste. Now this is the one that I created using Distress inks, and the heart texture is on there with gesso, and so you see that even when gesso is used on top of gesso, you can still see the heart shapes. It's still a little bit embossed where the hearts were. And I really love how these colors mix together. And when you put the pink on top of the blue, it reactivated the blue and turned it purple. It's just beautiful. I love this patterning that happens with Distress inks and water. It's so pretty. And it actually looks pretty okay on the paper side, the plain paper that's not finished with gesso. So Distress inks are one product that play pretty nicely with plain unfinished paper. And then this is the effect that I got from using the gelatos. Now I did kind of depart a little bit. I tried to use similar colors and similar techniques so that you could really see the difference that the different media make. But on this one I got kind of carried away with color and I just did this rainbow effect with the gelatos. This is one of my favorite things to do with gelatos, and I just couldn't hold back from doing it for you for this video because I absolutely love doing a rainbow effect with gelatos. I think that they blend so nicely from one to another. So I just really love how this looks, and I showed you, and this is how it dries when you dab it when it's wet. So you take those really dark pools and you dab up and you kind of sop up the liquid, and it leaves behind little white puddles, and I really love how that looks. And the gelato just sticks very nicely to the texture paste. This is the golden light molding paste, and it is just absolutely gorgeous. And if you're wondering, the color does not rub off. It looks like it might. People have asked me this about gelatos, but it does not rub off once it's dry. It is just really beautiful. My thumb was already purple before I did that. So yeah, also it's worth noting that the texture isn't all that different for gelatos from the paper to the gesso, although my experience has been that gelatos are really difficult to move around on paper. It could be that by the time the gelatos got down here, they were already pretty liquidy and already made into like a painty type of substance, and so it just kind of sopped in nicely. If I had started with the dry gelato on the plain paper that didn't have gesso on it, I would have had a much more difficult time getting the gelatos to move around on the paper, but this way it worked. It happened to work really well. So those are some of the different effects that you can get just using some supplies that you may already have in your stash, and adding gesso really does make a difference in the looks on some of these examples. And so I think that if you don't already have gesso, gesso is a really great starting point for jumping into mixed media. And of course, if you already do lots of mixed media, I'd love to see your pages. Please share them with us in the Facebook group to let us know how you're using texture, especially if you have some of the different texture products that I didn't cover in my class here. So thanks so much for watching and have a great scrappy day. I'll see you back in the classroom.